Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
When I first moved to the city for my job, I was excited. The tall buildings, the constant hum of activity, and the promise of new experiences were alluring. I found a cozy apartment on the 15th floor of a high-rise, offering a panoramic view of the cityscape. Little did I know, this view would become the backdrop of my nightmare. It started innocuously enough. I began receiving small gifts at my doorstep, a bouquet of flowers, a box of chocolates, and sometimes handwritten notes. The notes were always unsigned, filled with compliments about my appearance or what I had worn that day. Initially, I thought it might be a secret admirer or a neighbor trying to be friendly, but as days turned into weeks, the gifts became more personal. A scarf in my favorite color, a book by an author I loved, and even a CD of a band I had casually mentioned liking to a colleague. Concerned, I mentioned this to my friend, Lisa, who lived a few blocks away. She suggested it might be someone from work or a friend playing a prolonged prank. To ease my mind, she offered to stay over for a few days. One evening, as we were watching a movie, Lisa pointed to a building opposite mine. "Do you know that from here, if someone had a good enough telescope, they could see right into your apartment?" I looked out, realizing that my large windows, which I loved for the sunlight they let in, also made my life visible to anyone interested in watching. A shiver ran down my spine. The next day, I invested in curtains. But the gifts didn't stop. They became more frequent, and the notes more intimate, detailing things I had done in the privacy of my home. "I loved how you danced in your living room last night," one read. Another said, "The spaghetti you cooked looked delicious." I reported this to the police, but without any tangible evidence or threat, they couldn't do much. They advised me to keep a record of everything I received and to install security cameras. The cameras were my next step. I installed them inside and outside my apartment. For a week, nothing unusual happened. But then, one morning, I found a note on my doorstep. "Cameras won't help you see me, but I can always see you." Terrified, I reviewed the footage, and there it was. In the middle of the night, a figure in a hood and mask, leaving the note at my door. The cameras inside my apartment showed nothing. This person had never entered, yet they knew everything I did. Lisa suggested I stay with her for a while. Gratefully, I accepted. A few days turned into weeks, and during this time, no gifts or notes appeared at my apartment. I started to relax, thinking maybe my unseen observer had lost interest. One evening, as Lisa and I returned to her place after dinner, we found her door slightly ajar. Cautiously, we entered. In the middle of her living room was a pile of photographs. They were all of me, taken from a distance, capturing my daily routines. But the most chilling were the ones taken inside Lisa's apartment, showing me sleeping, cooking, or chatting with her. The realization hit hard. This person hadn't lost interest. They had merely shifted their location. They had been watching me from somewhere close, even at Lisa's place. The police were involved again, and this time they took it more seriously. They started by investigating the building I had initially spotted from my apartment. On the topmost floor, in a rented storage room, they found what could only be described as a shrine dedicated to me. Photographs, personal items I had discarded, and a logbook detailing my daily activities. The tenant renting the space was a man named Eric, a freelance photographer. He had become infatuated with me from afar and had started his silent observation. The police arrested him, and he confessed to stalking me for months. He claimed he loved me and believed we were meant to be together. The trial was swift, and Eric was sentenced to several years in prison and mandatory therapy. I moved out of the city, seeking solace in a quieter, more private place. After the trial, I found it hard to return to any semblance of normalcy. The city, once a symbol of opportunity and excitement, now felt like a vast expanse of potential threats. Every stranger's glance felt like a piercing gaze, every unexpected noise a potential danger. I decided to move to a smaller town, hoping the change of scenery would help me heal. The town I chose was the polar opposite of the city, nestled in the mountains. It was a place where everyone greeted each other by name and where community events were the highlight of the week. My new home was a cottage on the outskirts, surrounded by trees and overlooking a serene lake. The first few months were peaceful. The natural beauty of the place and the kindness of the locals were therapeutic. I took up gardening, spent hours reading by the lake, and even adopted a dog, Max, who quickly became my loyal companion. However, the scars of my past experience ran deep. I invested in a state-of-the-art security system for my cottage and often found myself double-checking locks and windows. Nighttime was especially challenging. Every rustle outside, every creak of the wood wooden floorboards would send my heart racing. One evening, as I was settling into bed, Max began to growl, his gaze fixed on the window. I tried to calm him down, thinking he might have seen a squirrel or some other animal, but his growling intensified, turning into barks. Concerned, I approached the window and peered out. To my horror, I saw a silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the woods, his figure illuminated by the moonlight. He was just standing there, staring at my house. Panic surged through me, memories of Eric and his relentless stalking flooding back. I immediately called the local sheriff's department. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, their sirens piercing the otherwise silent night. The officers conducted a thorough search of the area but found no one. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols around my property. The next morning, I found a single photograph on my doorstep. It was a picture of me taken from a distance while I was gardening. On the back, written in a familiar handwriting, were the words, "New place, same us." I handed the photograph to the police. They confirmed my worst fears. Eric had been released on parole for good behavior and had somehow managed to track me down. The police immediately issued a warrant for his arrest and provided me with round-the-clock protection. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of Eric, but the fear was ever present, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. One evening, as the storm raged outside, there was a knock on my door. Max immediately went into guard mode, his growls echoing through the house. I approached the door cautiously, peeping through the peephole. It was one of the officers assigned to patrol my house. I opened the door, relief washing over me, but as I greeted him, I noticed his uniform was drenched, not from the rain, but in blood. Before I could react, he lunged at me, a deranged look in his eyes. We struggled, Max barking and snapping at him. In the chaos, I managed to hit him with a vase, knocking him out. The police arrived shortly after, having received a distress signal from the officer's car. It turned out that Eric had ambushed the officer, taken his uniform, and tried to get to me. He was arrested and sent back to prison, this time with no chance of parole. The ordeal was a stark reminder that the past can come back to haunt you, no matter how far you run. But it also taught me the importance of resilience and the will to fight back. With the support of the community and therapy, I began to rebuild my life, determined not to let fear define me. Today, I'm an advocate for stalking victims, using my experience to raise awareness and help others. The journey has been long and challenging, but I've learned that with determination and the right support, one can overcome even the darkest of shadows. I've always been a creature of habit. My routines were predictable, from my morning coffee run to my evening jogs in the local park. It was this predictability, however, that nearly became my undoing. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the park was bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. The familiar trail, with its canopy of trees and the gentle sound of the nearby stream, was comforting. As I jogged, my earbuds delivered my favorite podcast, creating a bubble of contentment. About 15 minutes into my run, I noticed a man sitting on one of the park benches. He was dressed in conspicuously in jeans and a hoodie, but his intense gaze was fixed on me. I felt a pang of unease but brushed it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination. As I continued my run, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant footstep seemed amplified. I decided to cut my run short and head home. As I neared the park's exit, a black sedan pulled up alongside me. The rear window rolled down, and the same man from the bench leaned out. "Hey, I think you dropped this," he said, holding up a pendant that looked eerily similar to the one I always wore. Confused, I slowed down, instinctively reaching for my necklace. To my horror, it was missing. "Oh, thank you," I replied cautiously, reaching out to take it. In a split second, the man lunged at me, trying to pull me into the car. Panic surged through me, and I fought back with all my might, screaming and thrashing. My earbuds were yanked out, and the pendant fell to the ground. Suddenly, a pair of headlights illuminated the scene. Another car had turned into the park's entrance. The man, startled, released his grip on me. Seizing the opportunity, I pushed him away and ran towards the approaching car, waving frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and 2 people jumped out. The man in the sedan, seeing he was outnumbered, quickly drove off. The couple from the car rushed to my aid, their faces etched with concern. Shaken, I recounted the events to them. They immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. I provided a description of the man and the sedan, and they began their search. The following days were a blur of police statements, sleepless nights, and overwhelming anxiety. The thought of how close I had come to being abducted haunted me. My routines, once a source of comfort, now felt like potential pitfalls. A week later, the police made a breakthrough. The black sedan was found abandoned in a nearby town. Inside, they discovered ropes, duct tape, and a collection of women's personal items, including my pendant. The car was registered to a man with a history of stalking and assault. He had been released from prison a few months prior and had seemingly returned to his old habits. With the evidence at hand, the police launched a manhunt. It wasn't long before they apprehended him, hiding out in a motel. The trial was swift, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ordeal left a lasting impact on me. I became more vigilant, always aware of my surroundings, and never taking my safety for granted. I also became an advocate for personal safety, conducting workshops and seminars to educate others about the importance of being alert and prepared. The experience also taught me the value of community. The couple who had come to my aid, Jake and Mia, became close friends. Together, we founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping survivors of abduction and assault, providing them with the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives. The aftermath of the incident was a transformative period in my life. The city, which had once been a playground of familiar routines, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every corner held potential danger, every stranger a potential threat. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the raw edge of fear began to dull, replaced by a newfound determination. Jake, Mia, and I poured our energy into the nonprofit. We named it Safe Steps, symbolizing the journey towards safety and recovery. Our first initiative was to create a community watch program. Volunteers were trained to patrol neighborhoods, especially during the early morning and late evening hours, ensuring that those out for a jog or returning from work felt a little safer. We also collaborated with local schools and colleges, conducting workshops on personal safety. Students were taught basic self-defense techniques and the importance of being aware of their surroundings. These workshops became immensely popular, and soon we were receiving requests from institutions across the state. But perhaps the most impactful initiative was our support group for survivors. Every week, we would gather in a community center, forming a circle of trust and understanding. Here, survivors could share their stories, their fears, and their hopes. Listening to their experiences, I realized I wasn't alone in my trauma. We were a tapestry of resilience, each thread telling a story of survival and hope. One evening, after a particularly emotional support group session, a young woman approached me. Her name was Clara, and she had been attending our sessions for a few weeks. With tears in her eyes, she handed me a small package. Inside was appended, identical to the one I had lost. "I wanted you to have this," she whispered. "Your story, your strength, gave me hope. This is a small token of my gratitude." I was moved beyond words. It was moments like these that reaffirmed my belief in the path I had chosen. From a victim, I had become a beacon of hope for others, turning my traumatic experience into a force for positive change. Years passed, and Safe Steps grew from a local initiative to a national movement. We received endorsements from celebrities, partnered with major corporations for funding, and even collaborated with the government on policy changes related to personal safety and victim support. As I sit in my office today, surrounded by awards and accolades, I often find myself reflecting on that fateful evening in the park. It was a moment that could have broken me, but instead, it became the catalyst for a journey of empowerment and advocacy. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, testing our mettle and resolve. But it's in these moments of adversity that we discover our true strength, our purpose, and with the right support and determination, we can turn our darkest hours into our most defining moments. The quaint town of Elbridge was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, children played freely in the streets, and doors were often left unlocked. It was this sense of security and community that drew me to Elbridge after years of living in the bustling city. I found a charming two-story house on Willow Street, complete with a white picket fence and a sprawling backyard. The previous owners had maintained a beautiful garden, and the large oak tree in the corner provided a canopy of shade. It was idyllic, a place I could finally call home. The first few weeks were filled with the excitement of settling in. I got to know my neighbors, the elderly Mrs. Thompson to my left, who had lived in Elbridge her entire life, and the young Martins family to my right, with their two boisterous kids. One evening, as I was arranging my bedroom, I noticed something odd. The window facing the backyard had a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the glass, forming a circle about the size of a quarter. I dismissed it as wear and tear, making a mental note to get it fixed. A few nights later, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint noise coming from the backyard. It sounded like the soft crunch of leaves. I sat up, straining my ears, but the sound had stopped. Thinking it might be an animal, I went back to sleep. The next morning, as I was watering the plants, I found footprints near my bedroom window. They were fresh, indicating that someone had been there the previous night. A chill ran down my spine. I immediately reported it to the local police. Officer Daniels, a stout man with a kind face, arrived shortly after. He examined the footprints in the scratched window. "It looks like someone's been peeping," he said gravely. "We've had a few similar reports in the area recently. We're doing our best to catch this individual. He advised me to be vigilant, to keep my windows and doors locked, and to report any suspicious activity. The news was unsettling. The sanctuary I had found in Elbridge felt tainted. That evening, I installed motion sensor lights around the house and set up a security camera facing the backyard. I also informed my neighbors about the incident, urging them to be cautious. Days turned into weeks, and there were no further incidents. The sense of unease gradually faded, replaced by the routines of daily life. But the illusion of safety was shattered one evening. I was in the living room, engrossed in a book, when the motion sensor light suddenly turned on, and I froze, my heart racing. Grabbing my phone, I accessed the live feed from the security camera. To my horror, I saw a man standing near my bedroom window, his face obscured by a hood. He was holding something small and shiny, which he was using to scratch the window, creating the same circular mark I had noticed earlier. I immediately called the police, keeping an eye on the intruder through the camera feed. He seemed unaware of the lights or the camera, completely engrossed in his active voyeurism. Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. The man, hearing them too, began to panic. He looked around frantically, finally noticing the camera. Our eyes met through the lens, and for a brief moment, I saw a look of sheer terror on his face. He bolted just as Officer Daniels and his team arrived. They gave chase, and after a brief pursuit, the man was apprehended. He was identified as Tom Mitchell, a resident of Elbridge with a history of voyeuristic behavior. The small shiny object he used to scratch windows was a ring, a twisted trophy of his escapades. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community. People were horrified that one of their own could commit such acts. The scratched windows, his signature, were found in several homes, revealing the extent of his voyeurism. In the aftermath, the community came together, holding meetings to discuss safety measures and offering support to those affected. I, too, became an active participant, sharing my experience and advocating for increased vigilance. The weeks following Tom Mitchell's arrest were a mix of relief and introspection for the Elbridge community. The town meetings became more frequent, evolving from discussions about safety to broader topics like mental health and community support. It was clear that while Tom's actions were inexcusable, there was a collective desire to understand the underlying causes and prevent such incidents in the future. Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in Elbridge her entire life, shared stories of a younger Tom, a boy who had faced challenges from a young age. Abandoned by his parents, he had grown up in foster care, often feeling isolated and misunderstood. While this didn't excuse his actions, it painted a picture of a troubled individual who had slipped through the cracks. Inspired by these discussions, the Martins family took the initiative to start a community outreach program. Their aim was to identify and support individuals in Elbridge who were struggling, whether it be with mental health issues, financial difficulties, or feelings of isolation. I joined the program, seeing it as an opportunity to turn a negative experience into positive action. Our first project was to set up a community center, a space where residents could come together for various activities, workshops, and support groups. We organized fundraisers, and the response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life contributed, from teenagers hosting bake sales to local businesses donating supplies. The Elbridge Community Center, as it came to be known, quickly became the heart of the town. We offered after-school programs for kids, counseling services, job training workshops, and even art and music classes. It was a place of healing, learning, and connection. One of the most impactful programs was the Mentorship Initiative. Adults in the community volunteered to mentor young individuals, providing guidance, support, and a listening ear. The idea was to ensure that no one felt alone or unsupported, as Tom had. As months turned into years, the ripple effects of the community center became evident. Elbridge saw a decrease in crime rates, an increase in school performance, and most importantly, a stronger sense of community. Neighbors looked out for each other, and the bonds formed in the center spilled out into the streets, parks, and homes. On a personal level, the experience was transformative. The trauma of that night with the peeping Tom had left scars, but working with the community, channeling my energy into positive change, was therapeutic. I formed deep friendships, especially with Mia from the Martins family. Together, we spearheaded many of the center's initiatives, drawing strength from each other. One evening, as we were wrapping up a workshop at the center, Mia handed me a letter. It was from Tom Mitchell. With trepidation, I opened it. The letter was a heartfelt apology, expressing remorse for his actions and gratitude for the changes the community had implemented. He wrote of his time in therapy, the revelations he had about his behavior, and his hope for a second chance. While the letter didn't erase the past, it was a testament to the power of community intervention and support. Elbridge had turned a dark chapter into a story of hope, resilience, and collective growth. Today, as I walk the streets of Elbridge, I'm filled with pride. The town, with its vibrant community center, active outreach programs, and tight-knit residents, stands as a beacon of what's possible when people come together in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope waiting to be ignited. It was a typical Thursday evening. I had just returned from a long day at work, and the only thing on my mind was to kick back, watch some TV, and maybe indulge in a glass of wine. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, and while it wasn't the most modern or luxurious, it was home. The creaky wooden floors and the old-fashioned radiators added a certain charm that I had grown fond of. I settled into my couch, remote in hand, when I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like footsteps, but I brushed it off as one of my neighbors. The walls were thin, and I had grown accustomed to hearing the occasional noise from the hallway or the apartment next door. A few minutes passed, and I heard the noise again. This time, it was closer, almost right outside my door. I muted the TV and listened intently. The footsteps were soft, deliberate, and eerily quiet. It was as if someone was trying their best not to make a sound. My heart began to race. I lived alone, and the thought of an intruder was terrifying. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, but I could make out the silhouette of a man standing just a few feet away from my door. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and a mask. He seemed to be listening, waiting for something. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. Suddenly, he began to fiddle with the doorknob. Panic surged through me. I hadn't locked the door when I came in. I quickly turned the lock, but it was too late. The door creaked open slightly, and the man's eyes met mine. For a split second, we both froze. Then, without a word, he pushed the door with force. I stumbled back, trying to find something to defend myself with. The intruder was now inside my apartment, his eyes scanning the room. I grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it at him. It missed, shattering against the wall, but it bought me a few precious seconds to run to my bedroom and lock the door. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto it. The operator picked up, and I whispered my address and the situation. She assured me that the police were on their way and told me to stay on the line. The intruder was now banging on my bedroom door, shouting threats. I could hear the wood splintering, and I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I quickly opened my window, which led to the fire escape. Without a second thought, I climbed out, praying he wouldn't follow. I made my way down the metal stairs as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the ground, I ran to the street, looking for help. A few neighbors had come out, drawn by the commotion. They took me in, offering comfort and support. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the building and found the intruder hiding in the basement. It turned out he had been responsible for a string of burglaries in the area. He had been watching me for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I was shaken, but grateful to be alive. The experience was a stark reminder of the importance of always being vigilant and taking precautions to ensure one's safety. I now double-check my locks every night and have installed a security system. I also joined a neighborhood watch group, determined to prevent others from going through what I did. The weeks that followed were a blur of police statements, court appearances, and sleepless nights. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window sent my heart racing. I had nightmares of the intruder, his masked face looming over me, his cold eyes filled with malice. My friends and family were incredibly supportive. They offered to stay with me, to keep me company during the long nights, but I declined. I needed to face my fears head on, to reclaim my space and my sense of security. One evening, as I was returning from work, I noticed a note slipped under my door. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly lady who lived in the apartment below mine. She had written, "Dear, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. If you ever need someone to talk to, or just a cup of tea, my door is always open." Touched by her kindness, I decided to take her up on her offer. Over cups of chamomile tea, Mrs. Henderson shared her own story. Years ago, she had been the victim of a home invasion. She spoke of the trauma, the fear, and the long journey to healing, but she also spoke of resilience, of the strength she discovered within herself, and of the community that rallied around her. Our conversations became a regular occurrence. We'd sit in her cozy living room, surrounded by photos of her grandchildren and mementos from her travels, and talk for hours. She became a source of comfort and wisdom, a beacon of hope in my darkest moments. One day, she handed me a small pendant. It was a delicate silver locket with an intricate floral design. "This was my mother's," she said. "She gave it to me after the incident as a reminder that I was never alone. I want you to have it." I was moved to tears. The locket became a symbol of my journey, a reminder of the strength I had found within myself and the support I had received from those around me. As the months went by, I began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent, the fear less paralyzing. I started attending therapy, where I learned coping mechanisms and strategies to deal with my trauma. I also became more involved in the community, volunteering at a local shelter and joining self-defense classes. The intruder's trial came to an end, and he was sentenced to several years in prison. While it brought some closure, I knew that true healing would come from within. I had to let go of the past to move forward and rebuild my life. Today, I'm a stronger, more resilient person. I've learned the importance of community, of looking out for one another, and of never taking our safety for granted. I've also learned that even in our darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope. hope, a hand reaching out to help us through. And every day, as I wear the silver locket around my neck, I'm reminded of the journey I've been on and the incredible people who have stood by my side. I've always been an avid hiker. The feeling of being surrounded by nature, the chirping of birds, and the rustling of leaves underfoot is therapeutic for me. I've hiked countless trails, from the well-trodden paths of national parks to the lesser-known local trails. But there's one hike I'll never forget, and it's not because of the beauty of the trail. It was a warm summer evening, and I decided to take a hike in a forested area about an hour's drive from my home. I had been to this forest a few times before, but I always stuck to the main trail. This time, I wanted to explore a bit, so I decided to venture off the beaten path. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon a clearing. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything. I decided to take a break and enjoy the view. As I was sitting there, I heard faint voices in the distance. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the sound. The voices grew louder as I approached, and I soon realized they were chanting. I treaded carefully, making sure not to make any noise. As I got closer, I saw a group of about 20 people, all dressed in long, dark robes, standing in a circle around a large bonfire. They were chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. I hid behind a tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The group seemed to be performing some sort of ritual. In the center of the circle, there was a large wooden statue, crudely carved to resemble a humanoid figure. The statue was surrounded by various objects, including animal skulls, candles, and what looked like bowls of liquid. Suddenly, one of the robed figures stepped forward, holding a live chicken by its legs. The chanting grew louder and more intense. The figure raised the chicken above his head and then swiftly brought it down, cutting its throat with a sharp knife. The blood was collected in one of the bowls. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had seen enough. I slowly began to retreat, making sure not to alert the group to my presence. But as I was backing away, I stepped on a twig, which snapped loudly under my weight. The chanting stopped abruptly. All eyes turned in my direction. My heart raced as I realized I had been spotted. Without thinking, I turned and ran as fast as I could, not looking back. The forest was dark now, and I could hear the group chasing after me. Their chants had turned into angry shouts. I ran blindly, tripping over roots and branches, but the adrenaline kept me going. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the main trail. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I started the car and sped away, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When I finally reached home, I locked all the doors and windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't sleep that night or the next. The following day, I reported the incident to the local police. They searched the forest but found no trace of the group or their ritual site. They told me it was probably just a group of kids playing a prank, but I knew what I saw was real. A few weeks after the incident, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and even took up a new hobby, pottery. Anything to distract myself from the haunting memories of that evening in the forest. But the universe had other plans. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find a small package on my doorstep. There was no return address, just my name written in a hurried scrawl. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden figurine. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the larger statue I had seen in the forest clearing. My heart raced as I turned the figurine over in my hands. Tied around its neck was a note that read, "We know where you live." Panic sudden, I immediately called the police, who took the package for examination. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a few days, just to be safe. I decided to stay with my sister, who lived in a neighboring town. The next few days were a blur. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on the package or the figurine. They patrolled my neighborhood but found no signs of suspicious activity. They suggested it might be a prank, but I wasn't convinced. One evening, as I was leaving my sister's house to grab some takeout, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was an old, beat-up sedan with tinted windows. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I returned, the car was still there. And the next morning, and the next evening, it was always there, watching. I reported it to the police, who sent a patrol car to check it out. But by the time they arrived, the sedan was gone. This cat and mouse game continued for days. Every time I saw the car and called the police, it would disappear before they arrived. Feeling trapped and paranoid, I decided to confront the situation head on. One night, when I saw the sedan parked across the street, I approached it. As I got closer, the car's engine roared to life, and it sped away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in a dark robe. I was now certain that the group from the forest was stalking me. But why? What did they want? Desperate for answers, I decided to hire a private investigator. After explaining everything to done him, he agreed to look into it. He started by digging into local legends and folklore. What he found was chilling. The forest, it turned out, had a dark history. There were tales of a secret cult that had operated in the area for centuries. They were rumored to perform rituals and sacrifices in the forest, especially during the summer solstice. The wooden statue I had seen was a representation of their deity, a forest spirit that they believed granted them power and immortality. The Pai believed that my accidental discovery of their ritual had put me in grave danger. They saw me as a threat and would stop at nothing to ensure my silence. With this information, the police launched a full-scale investigation. They combed the forest, and after days of searching, they stumbled upon the ritual site. The clearing was empty, but evidence of recent activity was evident. The breakthrough came when a local farmer reported seeing a group of people in dark robes entering an old, abandoned farmhouse on his property. The police raided the farmhouse and found the cult members, including the man I had seen driving the sedan. The group was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including stalking and attempted kidnapping. It turned out they had been planning to make me their next sacrifice. I was finally free from their clutches, but the trauma of the experience will stay with me forever. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and started a new life. The forest, once a place of solace for me, now represents a dark chapter in my life that I hope to never revisit. But one thing is for sure, I'll never venture off the beaten path again. When I first moved into my new apartment, everything seemed perfect. It was a quaint 2-bedroom unit in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The rent was affordable, and the location was close to my workplace. I was thrilled to have found such a gem. The first time I met Mr. Thompson, my next door neighbor, was on a sunny Saturday morning. I was unloading boxes from my car when he approached me with a wide grin. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and deep-set blue eyes that seemed to always be observing. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Harold Thompson, but you could call me Harry." I shook his hand, introducing myself. He offered to help with the boxes, but I politely declined. There was something about his intense gaze that made me slightly uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new home. I'd occasionally run into Mr. Thompson in the hallway or the parking lot. He was always friendly, often striking up conversations about the weather or local news. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me a bit too closely. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mr. Thompson holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Just a little welcome gift," he said with a smile. I thanked him, albeit hesitantly, and closed the door. The cookies looked delicious, but I couldn't bring myself to eat them. Instead, I threw them away, feeling a pang of guilt for being so suspicious. A few days later, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was from Mr. Thompson, inviting me over for dinner. I pondered the invitation, torn between wanting to be polite and my growing unease. In the end, I decided to decline, citing a prior engagement. That's when things started to get strange. I began to notice Mr. Thompson more frequently. He'd be outside watering his plants when I left for work and would still be there when I returned. He'd often be in the hallway, seemingly waiting for me, and on more than one occasion, I caught him peering into my windows. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the incidents kept piling up. I'd find small gifts outside my door, flowers, chocolates, even a stuffed animal. Each time, there'd be a note from Mr. Thompson. One evening, as I was watching TV, I heard a noise coming from my balcony. I cautiously approached the sliding door and peered outside. To my horror, I saw Mr. Thompson standing there, trying to pick the lock. I immediately called the police. They arrived within minutes, arresting Mr. Thompson. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept shouting, "I just wanted to be friends." The next day, I spoke to the building's property manager. She looked visibly shaken as she told me about Mr. Thompson's history. He had previously been institutionalized for stalking and had a restraining order against him from a former neighbor. She apologized profusely for not informing me earlier. I was in shock. I had unknowingly been living next to a psychopath. I immediately began looking for a new place to live, eager to put this nightmare behind me. A few weeks later, as I was packing up my belongings, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Thompson, written from jail. In it, he professed his love for me and vowed to wait for me, no matter how long it took. I was terrified. I moved out the next day, leaving no forwarding address. I also changed my phone number and deleted all my social media accounts. Months turned into years, and the memory of Mr. Thompson began to fade. I had built a new life for myself in a bustling city, far away from the quiet suburban neighborhood where I had once lived. My new apartment was on the 15th floor of a high-rise building, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The added security measures, like the 24-hour concierge and CCTV cameras, gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to unwind at a local wine bar. As I sipped on my glass of Chardonnay, I noticed a man sitting at the other other end of the bar, staring intently at me. He was older, with a familiar set of deep-set blue eyes. My heart raced as I realized it was Mr. Thompson. Panicking, I quickly paid my bill and left the bar. I hailed a cab and instructed the driver to take a roundabout route to my apartment, hoping to lose any potential tail. Once home, I double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains. The next morning, I contacted the police and informed them of the sighting. They assured me they would look into it, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Days turned into weeks, and there were no further sightings of Mr. Thompson. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the trauma of the past had made me see things that weren't there. But one evening, as I was returning home from work, I found a familiar-looking note slipped under my apartment door. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. They read, "Distance can't keep us apart. I've missed you." I was paralyzed with fear. How had he found me? And how had he managed to get past the building's security? I immediately contacted the building management and the police. They reviewed the CCTV footage and, to my horror, found multiple instances of Mr. Thompson loitering in the building's lobby. He had somehow managed to bypass security by posing as a maintenance worker. The police launched a manhunt, but Mr. Thompson was nowhere to be found. They stationed an officer outside my apartment and advised me to stay vigilant. Despite the added security, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every shadow sent me into a panic. Sleep became a distant memory. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a soft tapping on my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I mustered the courage to peek through the curtains and came face to face with Mr. Thompson, who was dangling from a rope outside my 15th floor apartment. I screamed, alerting the police officers stationed outside my door. Within seconds, they had apprehended Mr. Thompson. It turned out he had been living in the building's basement, plotting his next move. Mr. Thompson was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ordeal left me traumatized. I sought therapy and slowly began to rebuild my life. I moved to a different country, started a new job, and even adopted a dog for companionship and protection. Today, I'm in a much better place, both mentally and emotionally, but the scars of the past will always remain. I've learned the hard way that monsters aren't just in stories, they can be right next door. The city had always been my sanctuary. The hustle and bustle, the lights, the sounds, it all felt alive and comforting. But that perception changed one fateful night. I had been out with friends at a local pub. We laughed, shared stories, and lost track of time. Before I knew it, it was past midnight. My friends, who lived in the opposite direction, offered to share a cab, but I declined. My apartment was only a 20-minute walk away, and I had made the journey countless times. Besides, the night was clear, and the streets were illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. The first 10 minutes of my walk were uneventful. The city's sounds began to fade, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional hoot of an owl. I was lost in thought, replaying the evening's events in my mind, when I noticed a figure about half a block behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was a city after all, and people were always out and about. But as I continued walking, I realized the figure was matching my pace. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the distance between us remained the same. A knot of unease formed in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to test my theory. I quickened my pace, and sure enough, the figure did the same. I then took a sudden turn down a side street, and after a few moments, the figure appeared, still tailing me. Panic sudden, I pulled out my phone, ready to dial the police, but to my horror, the battery was dead. I cursed myself for not charging it earlier. I knew I had to lose this person, so I decided to take a detour through a nearby park. It was a risk, given the park's reputation for being a hotspot for unsavory activities at night. But I was desperate. As I entered the park, the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves underfoot. The path was dimly lit, with shadows dancing eerily in the moonlight. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, hoping to put some distance between me and my pursuer. But as I neared the park's exit, I heard footsteps closing in. They were fast and deliberate. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the stillness of the night. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. I screamed, ready to fight for my life, but the grip on my arm tightened. "Hey, wait," the voice called out. I turned to face my pursuer, and to my surprise, it was a woman, probably in her early 30s. She looked as scared as I felt. "I'm so sorry," she panted, catching her breath. "I didn't mean to scare you. I saw that man following you, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." Confused, I asked, "What man?" She pointed to the park's entrance, where a tall, shadowy figure stood, watching us. The woman explained that she had been leaving a late night shift at a nearby convenience store when she noticed the man trailing watching me. Concerned for my safety, she decided to follow and intervene if necessary. We quickly exited the park, sticking together as we made our way to the main road. The man didn't follow, but we weren't taking any chances. The woman, whose name was Lisa, offered to walk me home, and I gratefully accepted. As we approached my apartment, I thanked Lisa for her kindness and bravery. We exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch. She insisted on waiting until I was safely inside before leaving. That night, I lay in bed, shaken by the evening's events. The city that had once felt so familiar now seemed fraught with danger, but in the midst of that fear, I found solace in the kindness of a stranger. Lisa and I became fast friends, bonding over our shared experience. We often joked that it was the universe's way of bringing us together, but in all seriousness, I'll forever be grateful to her. She reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, I took extra precautions. I invested in a portable phone charger, started attending self-defense classes, and made it a point to never walk home alone late at night. The incident had been a wake-up call, and I was determined to be better prepared. Lisa and I grew closer, often meeting up for coffee or a movie. We became each other's confidantes, sharing stories of our past, our dreams for the future, and everything in between. It was refreshing to have someone who understood the trauma I had experienced and who had been there to help me through it. One evening, as we were leaving a local cafe, Lisa's face turned pale. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "It's him," she whispered, nodding subtly towards a man sitting a few tables away. He was engrossed in a newspaper, but there was no mistaking him. It was the man from that night. We quickly left the cafe, trying to remain calm. Once we were a safe distance away, Lisa revealed a chilling detail. She had seen the man several times since our encounter in the park, always lurking in the shadows, watching from a distance. She had even received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. We decided to go to the police. They took our statements and promised to investigate. A few days later, they called us in for an update. The man, whose name was Robert, had a history of stalking and had served time in prison for similar offenses. He had been released on parole a few months before our encounter. The police issued a restraining order against Robert and warned him to stay away from both of us. But the damage had been done. The feeling of being constantly watched, of never truly being safe, weighed heavily on us. Lisa and I leaned on each other for support. We installed security cameras in our homes, joined a support group for stalking victims, and even started a neighborhood watch program. We were determined to reclaim our sense of security and help others do the same. As the months went by, there were no further incidents. Robert seemed to have gotten the message and disappeared from our lives. While the experience had changed us, we became more vigilant, more aware of our surroundings, and more appreciative of the simple joys of life. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Lisa turned to me with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said, "as terrifying as that night was, I'm grateful for it. It brought us together and showed us how strong we truly are." I nodded in agreement, squeezing her hand. We've been through hell and back, but we came out stronger on the other side, and for that, I'm forever grateful. We sat in silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple. The city lights twinkled below, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It was a cold winter night, and I had just finished a late shift at the office. Exhausted and eager to get home, I decided to hail a taxi instead of waiting for the bus. Within minutes, a yellow cab pulled up, and I climbed into the back seat. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a scruffy beard, gave me a curt nod as I told him my address. He didn't say much, which was fine by me. I was too tired for small talk. As we drove, I noticed that he kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror. At first, I brushed it off, thinking he was just checking on his passenger, but as the journey continued, his stares became more prolonged and intense. Feeling uneasy, I decided to make small talk to break the tension. "Busy night?" I asked. He grunted in response, his eyes never leaving the road. "Not really. You're my last fare for the night." I nodded, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, he was just a taxi driver doing his job. But as we continued driving, I realized we were heading in the wrong direction. My apartment was in the north end of the city, but we were heading south. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you're going the wrong way." He didn't respond. Instead, he locked the car doors and increased his speed. Panic set in. I fumbled for my phone, but before I could dial 911, he reached back and snatched it from my hand. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He chuckled, a cold, hearing sound. "Just taking a little detour." I racked my brain, trying to think of a way out. The windows were locked, and the doors wouldn't budge. I was trapped. As we drove further away from the city, the surroundings became more desolate. desolate. We were now on a deserted country road, surrounded by thick woods on either side. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. The driver turned to face me, his eyes cold and emotionless. "Get out," he ordered. I hesitated, fear gripping me. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. I said, "Get out." With no other option, I complied. The cold air hit me as I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the freezing night. The driver got out as well, the knife still in his hand. He approached me slowly, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "You know," he said, "I've been driving this cab for years, and every once in a while, I like to have a little fun." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Please, just let me go," I begged. He laughed, the sound echoing through the silent woods. "Not tonight." Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. Another car was approaching. The driver hesitated, glancing between me and the oncoming vehicle. Seizing the opportunity, I made a run for it. I sprinted into the woods, the driver's shouts echoing behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran, my only thought to get as far away as possible. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a house. I banged on the door, pleading for help. An elderly couple answered, their faces filled with concern. I quickly explained what had happened, and they immediately called the police. The officers arrived within minutes, taking my statement and launching a search for the taxi driver, but he was nowhere to be found. The only trace of him was his abandoned cab, parked on the side of the road. The police later informed me that the taxi was stolen, and the driver had a long history of criminal activity, including assault and robbery. They believed he had targeted me for a potential robbery, but his intentions had changed when he realized I was alone. I was shaken by the ordeal but grateful to be alive. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien, kindly offered to let me stay with them for the night, and I gratefully accepted. The next day, I returned to the city, determined to put the traumatic experience behind me. But the memory of that night haunted me. I became wary of taxis, opting to walk or use public transport instead. Months went by, and the police were unable to locate the driver. I began to lose hope that he would ever be brought to justice. But then, one day, I received a call from Detective Martinez, the lead investigator on my case. "We got him," he said, his voice filled with relief. "He was picked up in a neighboring state for a different crime, but we were able to link him to your case through fingerprints found in the stolen taxi." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had finally been served. The aftermath of that night changed my life in more ways than I could have imagined. The trauma lingered, manifesting in nightmares and a constant state of alertness. I sought therapy, which helped me process the events and rebuild my sense of security. One day, while attending a group therapy session for trauma survivors, I met Anna. She had been through a similar ordeal, having narrowly escaped an attempted kidnapping. We bonded over our shared experiences and soon became close friends. Anna introduced me to a non-profit organization she had started aimed at helping women learn self-defense and personal safety techniques. She believed that empowerment was the key to overcoming trauma. Inspired by her passion and determination, I joined her mission. Together, we organized workshops and seminars teaching women how to protect themselves and be more aware of their surroundings. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women attended our sessions, eager to learn and share their own stories. As the months went by, our organization grew. We received funding from local businesses and even partnered with the police department to offer advanced self-defense training. The community rallied around us, and we became a beacon of hope for many. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Anna and I sat down for a cup of coffee. We reflected on our journey and how far we had come. "You know," Anna said, "sometimes I think that everything happens for a reason. As terrible as our experiences were, they led us to this moment, to this mission." I nodded in agreement. It's amazing how something so traumatic can lead to something so positive. We've turned our pain into power. Anna smiled, and we're just getting started. Over the next few years, our organization expanded beyond our city. We opened branches in other states, reaching thousands of women and making a real difference in their lives. But despite our success, I never forgot that fateful night. It served as a constant reminder of why our work was so important. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the taxi driver, written from prison. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions and claimed to have found redemption behind bars. He thanked me for the work I was doing and hoped that it would prevent others from going down the same dark path he had. I read the letter with mixed emotions. While I appreciated his attempt at making amends, I couldn't forget the terror he had inflicted upon me. But I also realized that people could change, and perhaps he truly had turned his life around. I decided to respond, thanking him for his letter and expressing hope that he would use his time in prison to reflect on his actions and make amends. As the years went by, I continued my work with the organization, always striving to make a difference. And while the memories of that night still haunted me, I took solace in the knowledge that I was helping others and turning a negative experience into a positive force for change. The city's subway system had always been a marvel to me. The intertwining tunnels, the rhythmic clatter of the trains, and the diverse sea of commuters, it was like a pulsating vein of the metropolis. But one late night, my perception of the subway shifted from wonder to wariness. I had been working late at the office, trying to meet a deadline. By the time I packed up, it was well past midnight. The streets were deserted, with only the occasional car passing by. I decided to take the subway home, as I had done countless times before. The station was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the platform. I could hear the distant hum of a train approaching. I waited alone, lost in thought, until the train pulled up with a screech. The carriage was almost empty, save for a few late-night travelers. I took a seat near the door, plugging in my headphones and settling into my music. A few stops later, a man boarded the train. He was tall and lanky, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were tattered, and he carried a large duffel bag. He took the seat across from me, and I couldn't help but notice that he was staring intently in my direction. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but as the journey continued, his gaze never wavered. Every time I looked up, our eyes would meet, and he'd offer a chilling, toothless grin. Feeling uneasy, I decided to move to another carriage at the next stop. As the doors opened, I quickly made my exit, slipping into the adjacent car. I took a seat near the back, hoping the man wouldn't follow, but to my horror, as the train pulled away from the station, I saw him enter the carriage, his eyes scanning the rows of seats until they landed on me. He began to make his way towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. Panic set in. I considered pulling the emergency brake, but I was worried about the consequences. Instead, I decided to get off at the next stop and wait for another train. As the train approached the station, I stood up, ready to make a quick exit, but the man was faster. He blocked the aisle, his duffel bag acting as a barrier. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice raspy and cold. I tried to keep my composure. "Please, just let me go," I pleaded. He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Not so fast." Suddenly, the train jolted, throwing us off balance. I seized the opportunity, pushing past the man and sprinting towards the door. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the station and into the night, not looking back until I was several blocks away. Out of breath and shaken, I hailed a cab and made my way home. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking every room to ensure I was alone. The next day, I reported the incident to the police. They took my statement and promised to investigate. A few days later, they called me in for an update. The man, whose name was Victor, was a known criminal with a history of assault and robbery. He had recently been released from prison and was believed to be living in the subway tunnels. The duffel bag he carried contained stolen goods from a recent burglary. The police arrested Victor and recovered the stolen items. He was charged with multiple offenses and sent back to prison. I was relieved to know he was off the streets, but the trauma of that night stayed with me. I avoided the subway for months, opting to walk or take cabs instead. Months turned into years, and while the memory of that night never truly faded, I learned to cope and move forward. The city, with its endless possibilities, was still my home, and I wasn't going to let one traumatic event define my experience. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to face my fears head on. I descended into the subway station, the familiar hum of the trains and the chatter of commuters filling the air. My heart raced as I boarded the train, memories of that night flooding back, but I was determined to reclaim this space. The journey was uneventful, and as I exited the station, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Victor, written from prison. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions and claimed to have turned his life around. He wrote about attending therapy and anger management classes and finding solace in religion. He apologized for the pain he had caused and hoped that I could find it in my heart to forgive him. I read the letter with mixed emotions. While I appreciated his attempt at making amends, I couldn't forget the terror he had inflicted upon me, but I also believed in the power of redemption and that people could change. After much contemplation, I decided to visit Victor in prison. I needed closure, and this seemed like the best way to achieve it. The visit was tense, with both of us struggling to find the right words, but as we spoke, I saw glimpses of the changed man he claimed to be. Victor spoke about his troubled past, the choices that led him down a dark path, and his desire to make amends. He expressed gratitude for the second chance he had been given and hoped to use his time at prison to better himself. As I left the prison, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had faced my attacker, heard his side of the story, and found a sense of closure. Over the next few years, Victor and I corresponded regularly. He kept me updated on his progress, and I offered words of encouragement. When he was released on parole, I was one of the first people he reached out to. We met for coffee, and I saw firsthand the changes he had made. He had found a job, reconnected with his family, and was determined to stay on the right path. Today, Victor and I share an unlikely friendship. We both have scars from our past, but we've chosen to move forward and focus on the future. We often speak at schools and community centers, share sharing our story and the lessons we've learned. Our hope is to inspire others to believe in the power of redemption and the possibility of change. Life is unpredictable, and we never know where it will take us. But one thing is certain, with resilience, support, and determination, we can overcome even the darkest moments and find our way back to the light. This city had always been my home, a bustling metropolis filled with life and energy, but sometimes the noise and chaos became too much, and I sought solace in the local park. It was a sprawling green space, dotted with ancient trees and serene ponds. By day, it was filled with families and joggers, but by night, it transformed into a quiet oasis. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to take a walk in the park. The sun had set, and the park was bathed in the soft glow of the street lights. The air was cool and crisp, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets. I followed the winding path, losing myself in the beauty of nature. The trees cast long shadows on the ground, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. I felt at peace, the stresses of the day melting away. As I walked deeper into the park, I noticed a figure up ahead. It was a man, standing by the edge of a pond. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could see that he was staring intently at the water. Feeling uneasy, I decided to give him a wide berth. I veered off the path, making my way through the trees. But as I did, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. They were soft and deliberate, echoing in the stillness of the night. I dared not look back, fearing what I might see. Instead, I broke into a run, my only thought to get out of the park as quickly as possible. The footsteps grew louder, matching my pace. I could hear the man's ragged breathing, a chilly reminder that he was closing in on me. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning and my legs aching. Up ahead, I saw a bridge that led to the park's exit. I sprinted towards it, praying that I would make it in time. But as I reached the bridge, I felt a cold hand grab my wrist, pulling me back. I screamed, struggling to break free. The man's grip was like iron, unyielding and relentless. He pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. His eyes were cold and emotionless, devoid of any humanity. "Where do you think you're going?" he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. I tried to respond, but fear had rendered me speechless. I could only stare into his eyes, praying for a miracle. Suddenly, a bright light shone in the distance. The man turned to look, momentarily distracted, and I seized the opportunity, using all my strength to break free. I ran towards the light, not looking back until I was safely out of the park. The light came from a police car, patrolling the area. The officers had heard my screams and had come to investigate. They quickly took my statement and launched a search for the man, but he had vanished without a trace. The police informed me that there had been several reports of a man stalking women in the park. They believed he was a serial predator preying on lone women. They advised me to avoid the park at night and to always be aware of my surroundings. I was shaken by the ordeal, and it took me a long time to come to terms with what had happened. I sought therapy, which helped me process the trauma and rebuild my sense of security. I also joined a self-defense class, determined to never feel helpless again. Months after the incident, the park became a focal point for community action. News of my encounter spread, and soon, other women came forward with similar stories of being followed or approached by a mysterious man during their evening walks. The community rallied together, demanding increased security measures and better lighting in the park. Local businesses and residents raised funds to install surveillance cameras at key points throughout the park. The city council also increased police patrols during the evening hours. A neighborhood watch group was formed, with volunteers patrolling the park in shifts, ensuring that no one was ever truly alone. One evening, as I was attending a community meeting about the park's safety initiatives, a woman named Maya approached me. She was in her early 30s, with a determined look in her eyes. She revealed that she too had had a close encounter with the mysterious man, but had managed to fend him off using self-defense techniques she had learned. Inspired by our shared experiences, Maya and I decided to start a self-defense workshop for women in the community. We partnered with local martial arts instructors and organized weekly sessions in the park. The response was overwhelming. Women of all ages attended, eager to learn how to protect themselves and reclaim their sense of security. As the weeks went by, the park began to transform. The once eerie silence of the night was replaced by the sounds of laughter and camaraderie. Women jogged, practiced yoga, and even organized nighttime picnics, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. The police continued their investigation, and with the help of the newly installed cameras, they were able to identify the mysterious man. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and attempted assault. It turned out he had a history of violent behavior and had been released from prison just months before our encounters. charges. The news of his arrest brought a collective sigh of relief to the community. The park, once a place of fear, had become a symbol of resilience and unity. Maya and I continued our self-defense workshops, expanding them to other parts of the city. We also started a non-profit organization dedicated to empowering women and promoting safety in public spaces. Today, the park is a testament to the power of community action. Families picnic under the trees, children play on the swings, and couples stroll hand in hand, enjoying the beauty of nature. The memories of that fateful night still linger, but they are overshadowed by the positive change that emerged from it. As for me, I've learned the importance of trusting my instincts and being prepared. I still visit the park, but now I do so with confidence, knowing that I have the skills and the support of my community to keep me safe. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast expanse of the countryside. It was late, and the only illumination came from the dim glow of my car's headlights and the occasional passing vehicle. The radio played softly in the background, a soothing melody that contrasted with the monotonous drone of the engine. I was returning from a business trip, eager to get home and crawl into bed. The journey had been long, and fatigue was beginning to set in. My eyelids grew heavy, and I struggled to maintain focus. Suddenly, in my rearview mirror, I noticed a set of flashing blue and red lights. My heart sank. I hadn't been speeding, or at least I didn't think I had. I glanced at the speedometer, confirming that I was within the limit. Still, I knew better than to argue with law enforcement. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. The police car, a standard black and white cruiser, parked behind me. I rolled down my window and waited, my hands resting on the steering wheel. A few moments later, a tall figure approached. The man was dressed in a police uniform, complete with a badge and a hat that cast a shadow over his face. He shone a flashlight into my car, the bright beam momentarily blinding me. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "License and registration, please." I fumbled in my glove compartment, retrieving the documents and handing them over. The officer examined them closely, his flashlight illuminating the details. "You were driving a bit erratically back there," he commented, his tone accusatory. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" I shook my head. "No, officer, just tired from a long drive." He seemed to ponder this for a moment, then said, "Step out of the vehicle, please." Confused, I complied. The night air was cool, and I shivered slightly as I stood by the side of the road. The officer circled my car, his flashlight scanning the interior. "Everything okay, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him to the back of his cruiser. I hesitated, a sense of unease settling in. Something felt off. As I approached the police car, I noticed something odd. There was no license plate, and the cruiser lacked the usual markings of a police vehicle. The windows were tinted, preventing me from seeing inside. The officer opened the back door, revealing a dark interior. "Get in," he ordered. Alarm bells rang in my head. This wasn't standard procedure. Why would he want me to get into the back of his car? "I'd rather not," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Is there a problem?" The officer's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a menacing glare. "Get in the car, now," he growled. Thrill gripped me. I realized that this man wasn't a real cop. I was in grave danger. Thinking quickly, I reached into my pocket and pressed the panic button on my car keys. The car's alarm blared, its lights flashing wildly. The fake officer was momentarily startled, giving me the split second I needed. I bolted, running as fast as my legs could carry me. I could hear the imposter shouting behind me, his footsteps echoing on the asphalt, but I didn't look back. I ran until I reached a nearby farmhouse, pounding on the door until the startled occupants answered. They quickly let me in, and I explained the situation. They called the real police, who arrived within minutes. The fake cop was nowhere to be found, having fled the scene. The police launched an investigation, and it was discovered that the imposter had been involved in several other incidents, posing as a cop to rob and assault unsuspecting motorists. The cruiser he had been driving was stolen, and the uniform was a convincing replica. In the weeks that followed, my story became a cautionary tale that spread throughout the community. Local news outlets picked up on it, and I was interviewed multiple times, recounting the harrowing experience. While reliving the ordeal was emotionally taxing, I felt it was essential to raise awareness about the dangers of fake officers. The police department, in response to the incident and the growing public concern, initiated a campaign to educate the public on how to identify genuine officers and the correct protocol during traffic stops. They emphasized the importance of looking for authentic badges, proper vehicle markings, and always asking for an officer's identification if something feels off. Community meetings were organized where officers demonstrated the differences between real and fake uniforms, badges, and equipment. They also provided tips on what to do if one suspects they're being pulled over by an imposter, advising to drive to a well-lit, populated area or even the nearest police station, and to call 911 to verify the officer's identity. As time went on, the trauma of that night began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. I became an advocate for personal safety, joining community watch groups and even collaborating with the police department on various initiatives. One evening, as I was leaving a community meeting, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Lisa and thanked me for sharing my story. She revealed that she too had been pulled over by the fake cop but had remembered my advice. She asked for his badge number and called 911, which had caused him to flee. Hearing Lisa's story, I was filled with a mixture of relief and pride. My ordeal had led to positive change, and I was determined to continue my advocacy work. Today, I travel across the country, sharing my story and educating others about the importance of personal safety. While the memory of that night still haunts me, I take solace in the knowledge that my experience has made a difference. The world can be a dangerous place, but with awareness, education, and community support, we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from harm. The open road has always been a source of solace for me. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic beat of tires against asphalt, and the ever-changing scenery provided a therapeutic backdrop for my thoughts. That night, as I drove through the windy roads of rural Montana, the world seemed to melt away, leaving just me, my old Chevy, and the vast expanse of the starlit sky. It was around midnight when I first saw him, a lone figure, standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. He was tall, with shaggy dark hair and a beard, wearing a tattered jacket and carrying a worn-out backpack. Now, I've always considered myself a good judge of character, and I've picked up my fair share of hitchhikers over the years. Most were just folks down on their luck, looking for a ride to the next town. But something about this man gave me pause. Maybe it was the way he stood, slightly hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. Or perhaps it was the intense, almost desperate look in his eyes as he stared at my approaching car. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. The man approached, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Heading to Whitefish, he asked, his voice rough from the cold. I nodded. Hop in, I replied, unlocking the passenger door. He climbed in, settling into the seat with a sigh of relief. Thanks, he said, extending a gloved hand. Name's Jake. We exchanged pleasantries as I resumed driving. Jake explained that he'd been on the road for days, making his way across the country. He'd run into some bad luck in the last town and was eager to move on. As the miles rolled by, I tried to engage Jake in conversation, hoping to learn more about my mysterious passenger, but he was evasive, giving vague answers and often staring out the window, lost in thought. An uneasy silence settled between us, broken only by the occasional howl of a distant coyote. The road grew darker and more isolated, with dense forests on either side. Suddenly, Jake spoke up. Take the next left, he instructed, pointing to a narrow dirt road that branched off the main highway. I hesitated. That's not the way to Whitefish, I replied, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. Jake's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. Just do it, he growled, his voice dripping with malice. Fear gripped me. I realized that I was in grave danger, but I also knew that I couldn't show it. I had to think fast. Alright, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I need to refuel first. There's a gas station a few miles ahead. We can take the detour after that. Jake seemed to ponder this for a moment, then nodded. Fine, he replied, but no tricks. I drove on, my mind racing. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. The gas station was my best chance of escape, but I had to be careful. One wrong move could be fatal. As we approached the gas station, I noticed a police cruiser parked by the pumps. Relief washed over me. This was my chance. I pulled in, parking next to the cruiser. Jake watched me closely, his eyes never leaving mine. Stay here, I instructed, grabbing my wallet. I'll be right back. I entered the store, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer was at the counter, chatting with the cashier. I approached them, trying to appear calm. Excuse me, officer, I began, my voice shaking. I need your help. I quickly explained the situation, glancing out the window to make sure Jake hadn't noticed. The officer's face hardened, and he reached for his radio, calling for backup. They formulated a plan. The officer would approach the car, posing as a friend I'd run into. This would give me the opportunity to get away from Jake and ensure my safety. The plane went off without a hitch. The officer engaged Jake in conversation, allowing me to slip away. Within minutes, backup arrived, and Jake was taken into custody. It was later revealed that Jake was a wanted fugitive, responsible for a string of robberies and assaults across the country. The police believed he was heading to Whitefish fish to lay low and evade capture. I was shaken by the ordeal but grateful to be alive. The experience served as a stark reminder of the dangers of picking up strangers, no matter how harmless they may seem. Today, I'm more cautious than ever. I still enjoy the open road, but I no longer pick up hitchhikers. The memory of that night will forever be etched in my mind, a chilly reminder of the thin line between trust and danger. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.